Today I'm going to react to Konstantin Kisin's video, The West's True Story. I've not seen the video, so I'm going to be reacting to it with you. Let's get straight into it.
Jordan Peterson's Alliance for Responsible Citizenship asked me to contribute an essay to a book about the unique foundations of Western civilization.
Yeah,
Here it is. Across the Western world,
Unique.
we live in an age of almost unlimited prosperity, freedom, and opportunity. While much of the rest of the world continues to suffer from the scourges that have plagued humanity since the dawn of time, the average Western citizen is remarkably free from the risk of starvation, preventable disease, and crushing poverty. And although the threat of war has come closer, we enjoyed close to 8 decades of almost entirely uninterrupted peace.
True.
Yet most of us are profoundly unaware how unusual and precious our freedoms and comforts are. They are an inheritance which all too often we take for granted, which instead we should cherish and protect. What is more, even those of us who grasp the astonishing scale of these achievements frequently struggle to articulate how we reach them. Indeed, many of us are now confused about the concept of the West itself. In recent years, some have begun to ask questions.
Confused. Well, it's deeply, inherently complicated. The idea that and this is a talking point that simplifies, it's an us versus them dynamic. The West versus the rest. Africa, the East, the Middle East. Whereas you can't really talk about the West without talking about the rest of the world and the impact it's had on it. The relationship between the Middle East, our relationship with Africa, massively in terms of colonial history. So his analysis is so simplistic, and it is just like an exceptionalism, like an English exceptionalism, like we're the best. We've got all the best values. Freedom of speech isn't inherently a Western value. It's a construct that we've come up with that people should have the opportunity to voice their opinion. It's not inherent to the West. And also, Donald Trump is trying to suppress freedom of speech in America. So is Jeffrey Bezos, the Washington Post. Opinions that don't agree with Trump's regime are being censored. So let's not pretend that he cares about freedom of speech. The right never have. They never do. Only for themselves, and only to say the most abhorrent and often ill fact-checked and misinformed opinions. That's why we live in such a polarized time now, where they just think it's normal to have opinions that they don't have to really be backed up by facts, like science, like climate change now. No, it's not good for my bottom line and the fossil fuel industry, so let's just ignore that. Let's be Rupert Murdoch, one of the most powerful men on the planet. Let's kind of muddy the water on that and kind of dismiss and then sow the seeds of doubt and promote climate skepticism. But again, the theme of this, he knows he's lying. He knows what he's doing here.
About why countries all over the globe, from Australia to the United States, are all described with the same geographical designation. This, often deliberate confusion, is a sign that we have forgotten who we are. The critics are right. The West is not a geographical location. It is a set of cultural and philosophical ideas we have inherited from the ancient Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman civilizations. These ideas are not the same as they were 2,000 years ago. On the contrary, they've been refined, filtered, and improved through the centuries to bring us the technological progress, individual liberty, and prosperity we now enjoy. Curiously, many Westerners now deny the very existence of our disproportionate success. To describe our
Who does? Citation, please? Like a reference, like a quote? No, he won't evidence any of this. It'd be like Westerners say that it's clear that America, the most wealthy, powerful country on the planet, has mass, but so does China. Okay, right. Calm down, Anthony. Count to 10.
extraordinary achievements risks being accused of being some sort of supremacist who is merely describing his own sense of unearned superiority and not the reality.
I think he's really telling on himself there. Like the kind of person like Donald Trump's like very insecure. Like, I'm great. I'm the best. I know all the words. I've got the best words. I've got the highest IQ. It is just a thing like of since Brexit and the giving back of Hong Kong to China in 1999, what is the place of Britain? We have got an identity crisis. And we don't know where our place is because we are kind of irrelevant. We're America's lapdog. We don't have the prestige. We don't have the economic power outside of London. Like, what does it mean to be English? Who knows? It's a complicated question. There is not just one answer. We've got a history of socialism, fascism, the levelers, suffragettes. It's a complicated history. But he wants to like kind of narrow it down to like, oh, these things that I believe in. Would he say progressivism isn't a part of Western values? He'd just be like, no, anti-wokeism is Western values. Like, it's hard to debunk in a way because it's just so stupid.
On the ground. But the evidence is very clear. The world is and has been voting with its feet for some time. One need only visit any Western country to see the extraordinary pull our societies have for those who, like me, were not fortunate enough to have been born here. Millions of people risk their lives every year to enter Western countries by any means they can, and no one does the opposite. One does not see large movements of people emigrating to Vladimir Putin's Russia, Xi Jinping's China, Kim Jong-un's North Korea, or the theocracy in Iran.
True.
This extraordinary fact, which we all take for granted, requires some sort of explanation. Why is this happening?
It's quite obvious where the wealth is, like prosperity, like Europe is a wealthy continent. America is the reason why people historically over the last 250 years plus have moved to America because of opportunities. It's a natural thing. It's not a mystery. But that's not because of inherent values like, oh, we've got the better values. It's like, mostly it's economic. And the historical advances Britain has had, Europe has had, for various complex reasons. But that doesn't mean we're inherently exceptional or great. It means we kind of got lucky. We got very lucky in many ways, especially the UK, which is a complicated thing in itself. But it's no mystery why people want to go to a wealthy country, because there's opportunities.
Describe an entire culture in a short chapter is of course impossible. Whole libraries have been written about the evolution of our thinking that explore what makes us different. We ought to begin how
Makes us different. No, it hasn't. Like, that's not how academics think of it. Like, oh, we're different. No, academics will look at the relationships between different cultures and times and geographies and see actually often there's a commonality or how there is change, like differences and how change comes about. It's not like, oh, we're like, white Europeans are just better. Maybe the stuff he reads, but broadly, it's not like that. That's not how academics approach it. Like, we're the best. We're physicists. Like, we're the best scientists. Chemists are rubbish.
however, by deciding not to be afraid of the word different. If we acknowledge the reality that our civilization generates different outputs to others, we must then necessarily acknowledge that the inputs must be different too. When asked what makes us different, we often reach for words like democracy, freedom, and capitalism. But many of us have forgotten why.
Yeah, most people are free under capitalism. Yeah, definitely. Like, most people are happy with their lot under capitalism right now. The inequality, cost of living, not being able to afford a house, healthcare in America. Like, people are really happy with the state of capitalism right now.
They're valuable and what they actually mean. Let us therefore focus on three critical pillars of the modern West, which sit underneath the slogans. The first of these is the central premise of our civilization, the idea of the sanctity of the individual. This notion, which would have been considered radical throughout most of human history and remains so outside of our civilization, posits that every individual has an inherent moral value, which cannot be forcefully.
Unless you're an immigrant, then you don't come. You're not allowed here.
Denied for the needs of the collective. This comes from the Judeo-Christian concept of imago Dei, human beings made in the image of God. and thereby having innate human dignity. From this central
Unless you're an immigrant.
tenet of our worldview flows the form of government we now call democracy, which evolved from the idea of representative government. That one should have a say in how one is governed is another radical Western idea, which is a natural consequence of the belief that
That's not necessarily true. David Graeber's done a lot of work on this, like the idea that throughout history, that somehow democracy is like a uniquely Western value. It's really not. There's been different forms of democracy and egalitarianism and people having voices. Like the idea of democracy is, it may have originated in the form we know it now in ancient Greece, but there are examples of people making decisions collectively, which is democracy, throughout history and throughout different cultures. So it's not unique. This is not unique to Western values.
that every individual matters. In many other cultures, the people who rule over you are not viewed as a choice, but rather as an act of God or a natural ascendancy of power. Sometimes the ruler is bad and that must be endured. At other times he is good and for that we must be thankful. Like any system, government by consent has both strengths and weaknesses. Its big strength is a responsiveness to feedback and the ability to either hold failing leaders to account or to remove them. This impetus seeps into all the hierarchies of our society, which become flatter and less rigid as a result. The armies of Western countries, for example, fight better because the feedback from the soldier on the ground is more likely to reach the generals through more transparent and accountable channels of communication. The second pillar of our civilization is derived significantly from the first, but nonetheless has a prominence and function of its own. We believe that wherever possible, the freedom of human beings to speak their mind, pursue their interests, and engage in business, research, and creativity of every kind ought not to be constrained without a significant and pressing reason. Put simply, we think that all other things being equal, the more freedoms we enjoy, the better.
I don't think that's true. I think this historically, there's been more censorship on the right than there is the left. And that's not to say the left isn't censorious. Some parts of it are. But the idea that Mary Whitehouse, McCarthy, the Daily Mail, Fox News, they're constantly cancelling people. They're constantly saying, "Oh, woke." Like cancel culture is going after woke now. Like, oh, you can't do that. Freedom of speech for journalists that oppose Donald Trump. No, toe the line. They're literally not letting people in to the Oval Office or the White House who are critical of Donald Trump and also critical of Elon Musk. Like, do you oppose Elon Musk Doge? They're all quiet. Won't oppose him. Privately, they will. Privately, they'll say, "Oh, don't ignore his emails. Don't respond to his emails." But they'll just toe the line. But freedom of speech is a complicated thing. And obviously, I'm pro freedom of speech. But to act like Elon Musk is an advocate for freedom of speech when he blocks people, censors people, and only really signal boosts people he likes is kind of absurd. And there's problems on both sides. But historically, the people who've had the power in media have been on the right. Like Rupert Murdoch, for example, one of the most powerful media moguls on the planet, who has his fingers in so many pies, owns so much of media in the UK, America, Australia. He is right-wing. He has a right-wing bias. Fox News has a massive bias and had some of the biggest audiences during the election in November 2024. So let's not act like the left suppresses freedom of speech more than the right. Like, that's really not true. I'm sorry, it isn't.
But of course, this does not mean the freedom to do whatever you want without any constraint whatsoever. Clearly, even in a democracy, freedom is constrained by the rule of law. And yet the law is there to protect freedom for everyone and ensure that when one person exercises their freedoms, they do not infringe or undermine the freedom of other people.
True.
Freedom is not the right to do what we want, but what we ought to. It is the freedom
True.
to live up to the very best of our potential, to create, to innovate, to debate, explore, question, believe, and flourish. This is not true of other more collectivist cultures, where the individual's first job is to subjugate his own preferences to the needs of the group. While the collectivist system has some advantages, it is necessarily a brake on innovation and growth. Innovation is a process of changing the status quo, and
Not necessarily. Like, if you look at a country like China, they have some of the most advanced technologies in the world. So it's not that binary, and that's what he wants, is like a binary like this. No, there are massive individualist kind of. I mean, especially because capitalism has infected the world. Like, it's infected China. Like, the idea that, oh, they're all just collectivists. It's such an essentialist argument. Like, and then everyone in in the West is like a sovereign individual. They're individualistic. No, there is, I'd argue, more collectivism on the right than there is on the left. I think the left are often more individualistic, atomized, and the right is more like, yeah, toe the line, say this, kind of, this is the talking point, vegan sausage rolls or whatever it is, vegan scones, and they'll just do it, and they have a cohesive view. Whereas the left is so complicated, and we're arguing amongst each other, but he just wants to simplify things and make things, yes, the West is somehow a unique, special, it's special. Like, what we have is special. It's like, you think other people, like, the West ain't, if China doesn't say that, like, everyone thinks they're the best to an extent. Like, everyone thinks they're the most intelligent person in the room. Doesn't mean you are.
that requires doing things differently. Societies which encourage their citizens to suppress their own differences stymie their technological, scientific, cultural, and economic development.
China's doing pretty well, my friend. China's doing pretty well in terms of, like, obviously it's authoritarian. It's not a place I would want to live, but you can't argue the advances it's made over, like, high speed rail, batteries. Like, they make the best EVs, better than Tesla. I mean, Tesla's reliant on Chinese parts. It's, yeah. I wonder what he would respond to. Like, what about China? Well, apart from China, what about Singapore? What about many countries in the East that have great technological advances over the West? Okay, just ignore that.
A key product of the value we place on freedom of all kinds is freedom of expression, which is fundamental to everything our societies are and do. Representative government is impossible without the free expression of political opinions and robust debate. Pioneering research is impossible in an environment in which people dare not express controversial ideas, because pioneering ideas are by their very nature frequently controversial. But even more fundamental is the fact that human beings cannot think without speaking. The scientific reasons for this are outside of my areas of expertise, but we all know the experience of talking or writing in order to understand our own thoughts. Not only that, we also all know the experience of listening to someone who is freely expressing their ideas and modifying our thinking as a result. In other words, to think well, one has to be able to speak freely and hear and consider the free speech of others. Finally, the unbelievable increase in the living standards we've witnessed, not just of Western citizens but of the entire world, has only occurred in the last 2 centuries. Before that, everyone but a handful of monarchs.
I mean, the average UK citizen isn't as wealthy as they were 50 years ago. Like, house prices, yeah, overall, people, I mean, you look at, like, world poverty indexes and, like, how many, half of the population are living on $2-3 a day. That's incredibly like they massage the figures to make it seem like poverty isn't as much as a problem as it is. It is in the UK. We have hundreds of thousands of kids in food poverty. You have real issues of, again, inequality that he can't talk about. Like, that's the problems of the West, is that of capitalism and consolidation of the wealth. He won't critique that because he's benefit from it. He's not going to be like, well, capitalism has failed by its own admission. The average person can't afford a house. The economy has been in the UK stagnant. Wages have been stagnant for 30 years, and we need to change the system. We need a new controversial idea. But he doesn't want to say that. He just wants to maintain it. He's not interested in new controversial ideas of like, actually, shall we challenge the status quo? Shall we challenge? Can we do better than capitalism? I think we can. I think we can do a lot better. He doesn't because he's doing well now.
Monarchs and the aristocrats lived in miserable, crushing poverty. The reason humanity no longer suffers under these conditions has its roots in the Industrial Revolution, which converted the gains of science.
Such a broad statement, humanity. No, like sweatshop labor in India, Bangladesh, China. No, everything's fine. And capitalism is the best option. It's so silly. Like, talk about the flaws of capitalism. Be honest. Like, there's massive flaws and massive problems that can't be overcome by capitalism. They can't. They are inherent to the system.
Into technological achievements that have transformed the world and continue to do so. That this revolution occurred in England was no accident. As we just discussed,
It kind of was. We're a little island. It was like the idea was so special. Like, no, it was a little island that was kind of insulated from a lot of the wars in Europe, mainland Europe. We had oak, which gave us the opportunity to build tough, well-built ships. And there is contingencies in history. It's not like everything that he assumes in meritocracy here. Like, the best countries advance and the poorest countries are just somehow inferior. That's what he's saying here. It's simply not true. There's so much historical evidence to suggest that, yeah, the fact that Europe is dominant is based largely on just the climate of like we could build and have certain resources. That hasn't got nothing to do with personal, like, oh, we're great. It's just geographical luck. But for him, like, oh, it's unique to England. It ain't.
it was facilitated by a number of factors, including the intellectual freedoms of the Enlightenment, which fostered a culture of scientific inquiry and innovation.
But that started in the Netherlands. Like, liberalism started throughout Europe. Germany was particularly influential in terms of philosophical advancement. Like, it wasn't specific to England. Yeah, we played a part in it, but like this English exceptionalism is just so like anti-intellectual. It neglects the complex philosophical history of Europe, which is complex and wasn't unique to England. It wasn't. He's lying here, and I don't think he knows he's lying. I think he doesn't know.
And also a strong legal system whose basis was the evolving notion of the need to protect the rights of individuals. But crucially, prominent among these rights was the right to private property under the law, which protected investments and encouraged innovation.
Again, John Locke's notion of private property was very different to what he's thinking, what it's become now. Private property was something that a human would take, like you create something from your labor. So if you find a piece of land or a tree and you carve it into a chair, that's your private property. You've created that. You've you've combined your labor, creativity with a resource and created something out of that. But now private property is more about how we know private property today, like landlords, companies who own stuff and then extract wealth. That's, again, Adam Smith spoke about that. Like, when the Enlightenment started, it made sense at that point where capitalism did seem like the best option. Like, you work, you build. But now it's gone wild, where the inequality, the consolidation of power and wealth at the top, Adam Smith would not be happy with this. He would go, this has gone too far. Even Margaret Thatcher has said she regrets some of the excesses. She was quite a moderate woman. She regrets the excesses of the wealth at the top. She was not one of these people who just says, oh, greed's good. Greed's natural. It's not. This used to be not a normal position to have. Like, oh, the people at the top can have as much money as they want, and the poor people, screw them.
Culture, more than any other, has the intellectual and legal framework which is a facilitator of capitalism. We believe that if you create something of value to your fellow citizens, you should enjoy the rewards of your contribution and be protected from their arbitrary seizure or expropriation. Contrast this protection, for example, with a communist worldview in which people who accumulate wealth are necessarily eyed with suspicion and hostility.
No, no, it's who created the wealth. Is it the worker or the people who own it? Who in a business, who creates the wealth? Is it the Amazon workers or is it Jeffrey Bezos? It's obviously the people who deliver the parcels. It's not a mystery. Like, there would be no business without the workers. Take away Jeffrey Bezos. Amazon will work fine. Trust me, it will work fine. Probably work better because you'll have the workers who will probably come together and run the business more efficiently. They'll have more choice. They'll be happier. They'll have a stake in the workplace, and profits will go up because they'll go, actually, let's build it based on the people who work and the people who actually build and create the wealth of the business. Jeffrey Bezos is just expecting his workers to be in fear. They just work for what he can just get away with paying them for. It's like,
During the Soviet period, everyone from the aristocracy all the way down to the rich peasants was stripped of their property for precisely this reason. To this day, many countries do not have true private property rights. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, for example, was believed to have been the richest man in Russia, until he crossed Vladimir Putin, at which point he was imprisoned, and almost all of his property was removed from his possession under various pretenses.
but Russia today isn't a communist country. It's a capitalist oligarchy. That's the problem with Russia today. It's an authoritarian, fascist state.
The same is true of Chinese billionaires who remain prosperous only as long as they remain loyal servants of the Chinese Communist Party.
True.
The horrors inflicted on both the Chinese and Soviet people by these regimes are truly unspeakable.
True.
From the millions who starved as a result of government mismanagement to millions more who found themselves sent to hard labor camps or simply executed for the crime of speaking their mind or having the temerity to disagree with their government, the extent of the cruelty collectivist ideologues necessarily inflict on their citizens is beyond measure.
True. I agree with that. Russia was horrible. China was horrible. Some of the worst crimes ever committed to humanity. But let's not act like capitalism has got its clean hands. The amount of people that have died under capitalism through poverty, through Africa, through the suicide of Mexican farmers, through India, the amount of people that have died under colonial rule. Like, let's not act like capitalism is an ethical system that promotes well-being of its citizens, because it really isn't. Like, the average person in the UK isn't doing as well as they were at the height of more of a socialist, like 50s, 60s, 70s, more strong trade unions, high tax. People are not doing well. Let's not act like capitalism is this thing that, oh, it's such a beautiful system that everybody benefits from. No, not everybody is benefiting now. To an extent, yeah, people have got the smartphones and the TVs, but they're feeling alienated, isolated, but more polarized than ever. And people don't have hope for the future. People aren't hopeful that capitalism is going to deliver the goods. Like, we need more capitalism. No, we need something different, something radically different, a real change of the paradigm. And it is coming because these paradigms change every, 50, 60 years or so. There will be a massive change where people go, yeah, we need something different. We need to give control and power back to the people. The people at the top have got too much power, too much wealth, too much influence in media, politics. Politicians have been bought. That's the real problem. Let's give true power and wealth to the people who actually create wealth. Like since COVID, we recognized it was the bin men, the NHS, the cleaners, the teachers who created social wealth, not the people at the top. And we need to remember that.
One only has to read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, or accounts of the Cultural Revolution in China, or any of the memoirs published more recently by the survivors of North Korea's prison camps to know this. Capitalism creates unprecedented prosperity because instead of applying a
To some people, but not everyone. Like homelessness has gone up massively, child poverty. There's real discontent in America. Like massive homelessness problem, massive inequality. One of the richest country on the planet has massive problems with wealth inequality. Like healthcare it can bankrupt you. You get cancer in America, you're bankrupt. It costs tens of thousands of dollars. So be honest with the flaws of capitalism. He can't be honest because it's just like, oh, it creates prosperity. Yes, to an extent. But with massive inequality, most people don't get that prosperity. It's staying at the top. It's not trickling down.
collectivist top-down model, it has instead harnessed the greatest driver of human behavior: incentives. When properly aligned, the capitalist system encourages us to act in the service of our fellow man precisely because doing so is beneficial to us.
No, it doesn't. Actually, it doesn't. It incentivizes like his bad behavior, like division and like profit for me, individualistic. Like neoliberalism is about, right, dog eat dog. As long as I'm okay, so there is no society. As long as I get on, I can exploit other people, my fellow man. There isn't a sense of your community today. And that comes from Thatcherism. She killed communities. She made people believe that as long as I'm okay, my house is nice, it's nicely decorated, society outside irrelevant. And we're becoming more like that. We're becoming more insulated. Like, I don't want to go outside and interact with people because they're all evil and they're bad. And I just want to stay home and watch Netflix because you can't trust people anymore. It's deeply sad. It's a deeply sad situation. And it's only going to get worse with people like him who want us to be like this. They don't want people to go, actually, yeah, we're all basically the same. Our immigrant neighbors are like us. They're workers. They work hard. They contribute. He just wants to be like, well, we're special. And they're not like us. They're not. This is not like us. We're special.
Rather than attempting to beat out of us our selfish desires to usher in utopia, the West-invented capitalist model deals with reality. In societies with rigid hierarchies, where frequently a single man and his entrenched service bureaucracy are in charge, this is not the case. It is
Capitalism has massive bureaucracy. It does. And to an extent, that's needed. Like, you need bureaucracies to an extent to manage society. Like, if you've got billions of people, millions of people in the world, there is a sense of bureaucracy. But the problem is, capitalism doesn't lend to freedom for the average person. They are constrained massively in their workplace, society. Like, there's so much constraint on us. Like, capitalism does not lend to freedom. It lends to debt, isolation, atomization. You're working your whole life just to pay off a house that you're probably going to pay twice for. And at the end of it, it's like, well, can't we do better than this? Like, it's a modest proposal. Like, can't we do better than this, Constant? You know we can. And you can just, yeah, communism did not work in the past. But that doesn't mean that we can't come up with a better thing, that the next step, because there is. We had feudalism, we had capitalism. What's next? Work together for that. Like, can we come together and go, actually, what should be next with automation, stagnating economies, climate change? What would, in reality, you're talking about reality, what would be the next step in that? In taking into account material conditions, what is the next step? 10 billion people on the planet by 2050. Climate change, there's going to be water shortages. Soil's going to become depleted more than it is. Massive problems, potential wars. a multipolar world now with America going its own way. Europe maybe is going to join forces and maybe become more cohesive. China, Russia, so many challenges. But he wants to say, oh, the West. Like, it's just a simplistic analysis of a very complicated world.
It's not to your benefit to serve your fellow man. What benefits you the most is serving the hierarchy, often to the detriment of your fellow man.
It's so ironic because that's what capitalism is. We have to defer ourselves to the people at the top, the people who have all the wealth. Like, we have to sacrifice our lives, our whole lives, just to line the pockets of the wealthy. And we do live in a hierarchical system. Is he acting like people are free under capitalism? Where's the evidence for that? He's free because he's been lucky. What if he wasn't lucky? He wouldn't be saying this. It's that kind of survivorship bias where he's got out of it now, but he doesn't realize the reality of the average person now. He doesn't in the UK. He doesn't know how, your average family is struggling more than ever. He's insulated from that.
These three principal values, the sanctity of the individual, freedom of expression, and other basic freedoms such as freedom of conscience.
Sanctity of the wealthy individual. Let's get this right, Konstantin. Sanctity of the wealthy individual. Yes, they are untouchable. They get the rights. They will get the best lawyers. They will get the best education, the best, chances in life. But everyone else, no. And it is, again, socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. It's always, and that's the way they like it. They get all their companies get all the subsidies. Elon Musk, they get all the contracts, they get all the tax cuts, and then it's everyone else who pays for it. Is that fair? But I mean, is that fair in your heart and gut? No, it's not. And it drives me insane that he's trying to gaslight us like, yeah, capitalism is the best we can do. And if you don't like it, well, you're the problem. No, the problem is the system. We can do better. We can do better.
Association and assembly, and innovation, including private property rights and entrepreneurialism, are the reason for our success. And the proof of their power is in the fact that other countries which were not traditionally part of our civilization, but which adopted them, such as Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, now enjoy many of the same.
I think it was imposed a little bit on Japan after World War II. Like, the idea that and the IMF, like, a lot of countries had no option. They were imposed. Capitalism was imposed on them. Like, we made deals, we come in, like it was in Russia. Maybe he doesn't know this, maybe he's being dishonest, but the idea that, like, countries outside of the West have just no, that's the only option. There is no alternative, apparently.
Benefits. Millions lifted out of poverty, children who would have once died in infancy living to adulthood, and freedoms that ancestors could never have imagined. The question is increasingly being asked as
yeah, true. Like, Marx wondered at the benefits of capitalism. There is, and there's many freedoms. We're very lucky in the West, but that doesn't mean we can't do way better with the resources, the wealth, the ingenuity, the technology. We can do so much better. So much better. Why wouldn't you want better for everybody, Konstantin? Well, we know that because you're doing well. And that's the attitude now, is that, well, I'm doing all right. I've got my, I've got my car, I've got my house, I'm doing okay. That's all that matters to me. Everyone else, well, it's up to them. They haven't worked hard enough. They haven't been entrepreneurial like me. I'm a YouTuber, big YouTuber now. He got lucky. There's plenty of YouTubers out there doing what he's doing. They'll never get the chances he does. He's been lucky.
As how best to preserve and protect these achievements. There are many things that we can campaign for and demand from our elected representatives. However, the most powerful thing each of us can do is pass on the understanding of the uniqueness of our great inheritance to our children.
No, what we need to do to our children is challenge the status quo and go, actually, there are benefits to capitalism, but now it's got to a point where it's stuck such a stagnant beast that morphs and kind of just consolidates wealth to the powerful, that we need a radical alternative that gives power back to the average worker, where they have a stake in their work. They feel like they have ownership. They have meaning. Because depression, a lot of depression is correlated to control in the workplace. And people just don't feel like, they just feel like a cog in the machine of capitalism. Like they work all the hours God sends, and then they don't really feel the benefit from it. They don't feel the benefit from the taxes and it being spent by a government that actually cares about them. They don't feel like people out there like them. People are struggling, Konstantin, and you don't know this. He's in his ivory tower now. He just thinks that, yeah, it's okay. Capitalism has brought prosperity. We're unique. We're the best, and somehow to criticize it and our history. Oh, you're not patriotic. You're resentful. Why? Why can't you criticize something? Why not?
In a society that is as comfortable as ours, that is no small task, but it is possible. One of the most effective tools for doing so is travel. As we say in Russian, everything is understood in comparison. The more we see the world beyond the confines of our own civilization, the more our privilege stands out. There is always
Oh, I thought they didn't recognize privilege. Interesting.
room for improvement, of course, and as the technological, geopolitical, social, and cultural landscape changes, we must continue to adapt these values to the reality of the present day.
But we're not, though.
As long as we retain the right to choose who governs us, are able to speak freely, and can profit from improving the lives of our fellow citizens, we're sure to do so.
Not necessarily. I don't think that's inevitable. Like, the trajectory is not going that way. The trajectory is consolidation of wealth. They're getting wealthy and people are being screwed. So it's not inevitable. People want real change. They don't want capitalism. They want to be able to have freedom, to live their lives, be able to afford a house, be able to afford food, and have a future for their kids. Capitalism cannot offer that, and it won't. So hit the like button, and I'll see you next time.